So in this lecture, I want to give you a few quick tips in order to help you succeed in this course. Now, generally speaking, I find that when students follow these tips, they always succeed. And most often, when I see students that are not succeeding, it is because they are not following these tips. Now, I want to first mention that I truly believe that anyone can succeed in this course. This is the case whether you are a teenager still in high school or a senior who's retired and it's been decades since you've studied college math. In all cases, it really comes down to following instructions. Being diligent is key. As long as you can make a promise to yourself to be diligent and follow these guidelines, then I can promise you that you will succeed. Now that being said, what are the tips? In brief, tip number 1 is to use the Q&A. Too often, I see comments from students saying, "Oh, XYZ is missing from this course." My response is typically, well, actually XYZ is covered in Lecture 5, you simply missed it. But you see, I can't tell you that if you don't ask. So what's the better outcome? You live your whole life never knowing the answer to this question, or you simply ask, maybe bruise your ego a little bit, but at the very least improve your knowledge and skill. I prefer the outcome that results in you being better and more knowledgeable. Now, sometimes students reject this tip and say, but I didn't know what question to ask. This is good. You are exactly who should be asking questions. The reason you don't know how to formulate your question is because you haven't thought through the subject thoroughly enough. Most of the time, what I've seen is that, in the process of trying to come up with a question, the question often answers itself. Okay, so tip number 2 is to meet the prerequisites to this course. Now, a lot of students think of prerequisites as a barrier to entry. They think, oh, if the instructor mentions the prerequisites, he's punishing me by making me do more work, and he's saying I'm dumb for not knowing this stuff. Guys, this is not true. The prerequisites are simply information which exists to help you. It's information. It's not a barrier. It's not anything to attack you. It's simply information. So how does this information help you? Well, after you have this information, if you ever see anything in this course and you think, that looks weird, I've never seen this before, at that point, it's now a good time to revisit the prerequisites to make sure that there wasn't something you missed. If you didn't have the prerequisite list, then you would have no idea where to look. But with the prerequisite list, now you have a guide that tells you what you might be missing. Okay, so now on to tip number 3. This is something I've mentioned already, but it's so important that it's worth it to repeat. Be actively involved and get your hands dirty in this course. Like, if your hands are not physically moving while you are taking this course, you are not doing this correctly. There are 2 types of lectures in this course: conceptual lectures and coding lectures. With conceptual lectures, you need to be taking handwritten notes. What I've seen myself in the past, what I've seen many other people say, and what a lot of psychological research demonstrates, is that taking handwritten notes is a superior method of learning and absorbing information. This is better than staring at slides, better than watching videos passively, and better than even typing notes. Something about physically writing builds a superior mind-muscle connection. Now, when it comes to coding lectures, you already know this, but open up your favorite coding environment and write that code. If it's a course where you're learning an algorithm, then remember that implementing the algorithm is your exercise for the course. If you're just watching the lectures all the way through and twiddling your thumbs, then you are cheating by looking at the solution before completing the exercise yourself. But whether you're implementing an algorithm or just learning about a library, you must actually write code. I don't know any data scientists or machine learning engineers who don't code. Now, I just want to mention that this list is a condensed version of the full How to Succeed lecture, which can be found in the FAQ of this course. So if you have any objections to these tips or you think that they don't quite make sense, please check out that lecture for more detail. Okay, so what is the common thread between all these tips? The common thread is that the reason students don't follow these tips is because they let their egos get in the way. In fact, ego is the #1 thing holding you back from succeeding in this course. Your pride is holding you back from succeeding in this course. Here's a fun fact. I've noticed a disproportionately large number of students claiming to have PhDs, but who do very poorly. Yet I see undergrads, masters, and even high school students who do better. How can this be? Well, you see, the problem with PhDs is that they think they are so smart that they have nothing left to learn. This is an example of ego and pride holding them back from learning new things. For tip number 1, ego holds people back from using the Q&A. Often, using the Q&A involves you asking a question which reveals your mistaken assumptions, which will then be corrected by whomever answers the question. This might hurt you a little bit, knowing that you got something wrong. But as mentioned, it's better to learn that you are wrong instead of continuing to be wrong and blissfully ignorant. For tip number 2, ego holds people back from meeting the prerequisites. They think, I took calculus, therefore I know calculus, and anything that involves calculus that I see in the future, I must understand, otherwise it wasn't explained correctly. Guys, this is not a good way to go through life. I learn new things about machine learning constantly, despite the fact that I took my first machine learning course over a decade ago. And let's be clear, if you got a B or a C in your course, which is a so-called average grade, that means quantitatively, your understanding was only at 60 or 70%. Now, another common excuse I see is, oh yeah, well I took calculus 20 years ago, so I forgot everything. It's now your responsibility to teach me everything again. Guys, no, this does not count as meeting the prerequisites. Remember that the prerequisites are there to ensure you have a skill that you can make use of. It is not a list of credentials. Credentials might matter when you apply for a job, but they're irrelevant in a self-paced course when all you have to depend on is yourself. Think of it this way. Would you fly an airplane if you had a piece of paper saying that you could, but in actuality, you forgot everything about how to actually fly airplanes? I think that would be very dangerous, and I don't think that any normal person would answer yes to this question. Finally, for tip number 3, ego holds people back from getting their hands dirty and taking notes and writing code. I can tell that this is the case, because when I mention how writing code is a great exercise, and it is literally the job you will do as a data scientist, people would rather argue with me than accept this advice. They care more about calling me names and making threats than they do about actually becoming better data scientists. They simply cannot handle the reality that muscle memory exists. Coding is a useful exercise, and coding is literally the job description. They would rather believe in their minds that they can write perfect code without any practice. The reason they're afraid to code is that once they start, they might make mistakes, which would expose their imperfect coding abilities. And that's the most difficult thing for someone with too much pride and too much ego. They simply cannot face the idea of being wrong or making mistakes. It's too burdensome to bear. Okay, so I hope you guys are getting the idea. Do not let your ego get in the way of your success. Don't be afraid to be wrong, and follow these instructions as diligently as possible. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next lecture.